There's no gun, no scope, no clean shot echoing through trees. Just breath held in silence, boots sinking into damp leaves, and a world that doesn't care if you're hungry. In the medieval forest, hunting wasn't sport. It was survival, punishment, privilege, or rebellion, sometimes all at once. And long before powder and trigger changed the game, people hunted with tools carved by hand, with patience taught by hunger, and with knowledge that left no sound behind. This is how it was done before the rifle. The bow hunt. Its weight rested in the fingers long before the pull. The string hummed softly in the mind before it ever moved. In the medieval forest, there was no such thing as a casual shot. Every arrow cost time. Every mistake cost meat. This wasn't the battlefield. This was the tree line. And the hunter moved slower than wind, tracking the shape of a footprint filled with water, reading the way birds had stopped singing 50 paces ahead. Bows used for hunting were lighter than the war bows carried into sieges. Shorter, easier to maneuver through bramble and brush, made of yew, elm, ash, shaped by hand and tension. They were drawn not for power, but for precision. The arrowheads told the difference. Broadheads widened to bleed, not pierce. Some were blunted to stun small game without shattering bone. The quarry wasn't an enemy. It was dinner, which made the shot more personal, not less. Poachers in royal woods risked their lives to shoot a single deer. A bow in the wrong hands could be read as rebellion, but hunger didn't recognize law, and the forests, thick and unguarded, became classrooms. Boys learned to shoot by missing. Fathers corrected them in whispers. A kill wasn't just skill. It was patience remembered. In the north, hunters painted their faces with ash and wore cloaks that matched bark. In the south, they crouched in wetlands for hours, unmoving. All of them learned to silence their breath, their steps, their expectations. When the string released, the arrow was already forgotten. The body focused forward, on the sound, the motion, the possibility of blood on leaves, or the snap of an animal fleeing just beyond reach. The kill was rarely clean. Sometimes it wasn't quick. But a well-placed shot meant food for days, tallow for candles, sinew for repairs, bone for tools. The bow didn't end the work, it started it. But not every trap was drawn by hand. Some were built with nothing more than earth, weight, and the willingness to wait. Pitfalls and Deadfalls. Sometimes the best way to hunt was to not be there at all. Traps didn't require speed. They didn't ask for strength. Just knowledge of terrain, patience, and a few tools passed down from older hands. In the medieval woods, pitfall and deadfall traps turned gravity into a weapon and absence into strategy. A pitfall was brutal in its simplicity. A hole, narrow at the bottom, camouflaged at the top, covered with branches, leaves, loose dirt. A deer running full stride wouldn't see it until too late. The drop didn't need to be deep, just enough to snap a leg, trap a body, keep the animal from fleeing while others approached with blades or spears. Some pits were lined with sharpened stakes, more cruel, more dangerous, but more effective when game was scarce. Deadfalls were smaller, designed for boars, foxes, sometimes even birds. A log suspended above a baited trigger. The mechanism often built from split sticks, vines, animal sinew, or twisted bark. The wrong touch released the weight. A stone the size of a man's chest fell like judgment. It didn't always kill instantly, but it didn't have to. The point was control. No two traps were alike. Each was tailored to the land, the season, the species. In wetter climates, hunters lined pits with straw to keep them from filling with mud. In rocky ground, deadfalls were preferred, easier to conceal between roots and stone. In snow, traps were reshaped daily, rebuilt to account for shifting layers and vanishing tracks. Setting them wasn't fast. It could take hours to dig, test, adjust the tension. But once set, they multiplied your reach. A single hunter could monitor a half-dozen sites, checking each one like an extension of his own presence in the forest. It turned the hunt from chase into harvest. And unlike a bow or spear, traps made no noise. They didn't miss. They didn't sleep. They just waited. But the waiting wasn't passive. It was part of the rhythm, part of the mindset of a hunter who knew that some prey wouldn't fall unless they never saw the hands that took them. Others, though, needed to be approached from the sky. Falconry. It wasn't a tool. It was a partner. And it didn't obey out of fear, but hunger, habit, and a bond sharpened through repetition. Falconry wasn't the most common hunting method among peasants. In most of medieval Europe and the Islamic world, it was practiced by those with access to land, time, and birds. But it wasn't always a luxury. In the right hands, and with the right bird, falconry was a tool of quiet efficiency, one that required no arrow, no net, no metal, just sky and silence. The bird wasn't raised, it was taken. Trapped young, trained with patience. A hood kept it calm, a leather jess wrapped around its legs. The falconer carried it on a gloved arm, not as decoration, but as readiness. When loosed, the hawk or falcon moved like a blade, not circling, falling. It struck birds mid-air, chased rabbits from undergrowth, drove game into open ground. Some hunts lasted seconds, others hours. Success depended not on force, but timing. When to release, where to guide, when to recall. Training a bird took months, sometimes longer. The hunter had to learn its moods, its hunger, its thresholds. Rewards were given not as praise, but as meat. Trust wasn't given. It was earned, one clean kill at a time. In Islamic Persia and across the steppes of Central Asia, falconry was both sport and survival. It appears in manuscripts not just as pastime, but as part of a mobile lifestyle, an ideal hunting companion for people always on the move. In parts of England and France, noble falconers passed down family techniques. But in outlying villages, even commoners trained kestrels and sparrowhawks, using them to supplement winter food stores when ground game was scarce or snow made traps unreliable. The bird saw what the hunter could not. It reached places no man could walk. Its presence altered the forest itself. Birds scattered differently, hares froze in place. The whole rhythm shifted. But it wasn't a weapon you could hold. You couldn't sharpen it. You couldn't replace it. If the bird flew too far, it was gone. If you rushed the training, it turned wild. The risk was part of the pact. Not every hunter accepted that. Some needed something they could build, something they could set, something they could retrieve on their own terms. Snares and loop traps. Not all hunting meant tracking. Sometimes it meant weaving. The snare was quiet, modest, invisible if done right, just a loop of cord or wire held open by tension and intent, placed along a known path, disguised by habit. It didn't require force. It required memory of where the rabbits passed, where the fox paused, where the underbrush bent ever so slightly out of rhythm. Medieval snares were made from whatever held a shape: braided horsehair, dried plant fiber, twisted gut. In wealthier regions, thin wire from metal scrap. The principle was always the same: tension held back by a trigger. A foot steps through the loop. The animal moves forward. The snare tightens. Panic does the rest. For small game, this was often the most reliable form of hunting. Snares could be set by children, checked by elders, deployed across dozens of paths, increasing the chance of food without demanding full hours of chase. In the harsh weeks before spring bloom, or after harvest had emptied the fields, they made the difference between hunger and just enough. Loop traps were variations, sometimes mounted on branches to snap upward and suspend the animal in the air, away from predators, away from moisture. Other times set low, pulling the prey sideways into a hidden hole. The mechanics were simple, but setup was delicate. A single twig misaligned, and the trap failed. In the forests of Eastern Europe, entire families would work trap lines, checking them at dawn, resetting them by dusk. In the alpine regions, stones were stacked along narrow paths to guide hares into loop traps, almost like fences. In Japan, snares were often paired with scarecrows to funnel birds into narrow corridors where movement became predictable. And because snares left no blood, no chase, no broken branches behind, they didn't warn others. An animal taken by snare didn't scream, it just vanished. But not everything was meant to kill instantly. Some hunts demanded confrontation, not from a distance, not by trick, but face to face. When the prey was too large, too stubborn, or too angry to be tricked, there was only one method left: boar spear hunting. Some hunts didn't allow for hesitation. When a wild boar charged through the underbrush, it wasn't just a matter of speed or strength. It was mass, muscle, and intent aimed straight at the hunter's chest. And unlike deer or hare, the boar didn't run. It fought. To face it, medieval hunters used the boar spear, shorter than a war spear, thicker in the shaft, and tipped with a wide, often leaf-shaped blade. But its most important feature wasn't the point. It was the crossbar just behind it, called a lugs or wings. Not decoration, a stopper. Without that bar, the boar wouldn't stop. Even after being pierced, it would run itself up the shaft, tearing deeper into its own body until it reached the hunter behind the wood. The crossbar kept that from happening. It turned a fatal wound into a standstill. Just enough. Boar hunting wasn't just for meat. In many parts of Europe, it was ritualized, proof of courage, a symbol of masculine initiation. In noble courts, it was spectacle, but in rural regions, it was risk taken out of necessity. A single boar could feed a household for weeks, its hide, its fat, its bones, all usable. The risk wasn't glory. It was cold hunger waiting outside. The technique was brutal. A team might use dogs to corner the animal or beaters to drive it into a trap. The spear had to be braced, butt planted against the earth, arms extended, knees slightly bent. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the animal turned. Too late, and it tore through you like brush. And the spear had to hold. In the Balkans, similar hunts were done with shorter spears and thick leather shields. In the Caucasus, curved blades were sometimes used in tandem, but the principle remained. Boar hunting wasn't distant. It was a collision, and it left scars even on the survivors. But for all its danger, the hunt began long before the first charge. It started in the mud, in the signs, in the story left behind by hooves, broken roots, torn moss. Because no spear could help a hunter who didn't know where to aim in the first place. Calling and luring. Sometimes the hunt didn't begin with movement. It began with sound. Long before modern game calls and decoys, medieval hunters lured animals using what they had: voice, breath, bone, and rhythm. Calling was not a trick. It was a dialogue, half mimicry, half memory. And when done well, it pulled the wild closer without a single step forward. A reed whistle carved by hand, a horn made from hollowed antler, the cupped hands of a boy imitating the sharp bark of a fox or the hoot of an owl. These weren't toys. They were instruments of control. And learning their language took years. Deer responded to the gentle grunt of a rival buck. Birds were drawn by chirps that mimicked the panic of one of their own. Boars could be baited with the squeal of piglets, but doing it wrong brought trouble. An angry boar could charge the sound instead of fleeing from it. Movement worked too. A rag soaked in blood, a handful of fresh berries left in an open path, the flicker of a white cloth tied to a branch, imitating a feeding tail. In some regions, a child would walk ahead dragging a leafy branch behind him to simulate grazing. It wasn't deception, it was performance. In wet climates, fish guts were used to attract scavengers. In dry ones, water itself was the bait, poured slowly into a basin, its sound traveling through the stillness like a whisper of hope. Sometimes the hunter never moved, just waited, watching the forest respond to what it thought was familiar. Falconers used lures tied with feathers to recall their birds or to draw prey upward into open sky. Trappers baited snares with fermented fruit, carrion, or even cloth soaked in animal fat. They knew what each species liked, but more importantly, they knew what made it curious. Curiosity was often more useful than hunger. The point wasn't to fool the animal. It was to speak a language it already knew, and say just enough to make it step closer. Because once it moved even a little, the rest of the forest changed. And suddenly, the trail began to write itself. Tracking and reading signs. Before the shot, before the trap, before the spear, there was the trail. The best hunters didn't just know where the animals were. They knew where they had been, what they were thinking, what they feared. Tracking was less about following footprints and more about understanding a conversation that didn't use words. A snapped twig meant little alone, but paired with a bent blade of grass, a warm patch of soil, or a smear of mud on bark, it became a direction. A story. One that could be read if you knew how to listen with your eyes. In winter, tracks were obvious, but danger hid in that clarity. What looked fresh might be half a day old. What looked like a path might be a decoy. In spring, when rain erased signs within hours, the hunter had to trust impressions left more in the mind than the ground. Hunters marked the width of spacing between hoofprints. A calm deer stepped narrowly. A fleeing one widened its stance. The height of scratches on bark told the age and size of a boar. The direction of a broken branch revealed whether it was running uphill or down, whether it was being chased or chasing something else. Some carried no weapons, just a walking stick and eyes sharpened by repetition. In parts of Scandinavia and the Alps, elder trackers led hunts without ever drawing a bow. They spoke little, pointed often, knew the color of fur caught on a thorn by smell alone. And it wasn't always animals, a footprint near a snare that didn't belong to your household. Ashes where no fire should be, scat filled with feathers instead of berries. The forest told on everyone if you knew how to hear it. Tracking wasn't just skill. It was patience stretched across hours, moving slower than light, learning how to wait without thinking of time. It was the one ability that made every other method possible, because without it, you were guessing. And in the forest, guessing got you nothing. But with it, a bow found its range. A trap found its mark. A spear met its moment. And slowly, if you read the signs right, the forest began to speak back. They hunted without noise, without engines, without shortcuts. Every step into the forest was a calculation. How close to get, how far to fall, how much to take. They didn't call it survival, they just called it life. And the skills passed down, through hands, through habit, through error, were sharpened not by books, but by hunger. What they hunted fed them, clothed them, sometimes even healed them. But it also tested them in ways that couldn't be seen from the outside. Patience became instinct, silence became strength, and every tool, from a loop of fiber to a trained falcon, came with its own rhythm. Today, we talk about going back to the land, about relearning old ways. But for them, there was no back. There was only forward, through frost, through mud, through thick trees, where the next track might mean meat or nothing at all. They left few records, few monuments, but they left patterns, methods, warnings, and maybe, in a world too loud to hear the forest clearly anymore, that's enough to start listening again.